Pax Vobiscum. Today, we are going to learn about the beasts of Revelation. Now, first of all, this is just my opinion. I'm not saying that this is true. I could be wrong. I've read some other interpretations, and they're good too, but this is just what I think. Not only will we be using the book of Revelation, we're going to be using Suetonius, the 12 Caesars, the Annals of Rome by Tacitus, and from the Hebrew perspective, the Jewish War by Flavius Josephus, and other contemporary accounts to decipher the identity of these beasts. And again, I will be reading to stay on track. The first nightmarish image of Revelation is a woman giving birth and being attacked by a dragon. John saw the woman clothed in the sun with the moon under her feet, and on her head was a crown of 12 stars. She was with child and wailed with pain as she labored to give birth. In Matthew's Gospel, God then appeared to Joseph, Mary, and told them, "She will bear a son. You will name him Jesus, because he will save the people from all their sins." John continues in his apocalyptic account, "There was another sign in the sky. It was a huge red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on its head were 7 diadems. The dragon stood before the woman about to give birth to devour the child when she gave birth." Just as the dragon attacks the woman, King Herod of Judea sought to kill the Christ child upon learning from the Magi that this newborn would become more powerful than he was. Furthermore, Herod could not find the child, so he hunted down the whole Holy Family in more drastic measures, the slaughter of the innocents. The passage from Revelation parallels with the other Gospels. Also, according to Matthew's Gospel, when the 3 wise men approached King Herod about a newborn Messiah, Herod asked them to report back to him where the infant could be found. Herod said, "Go diligently for the child. When you have found him, bring me word so I may do him homage." Herod's intent was to murder the newborn, but John symbolizes this by saying, "The serpent spewed out a torrent of water from its mouth after the woman to sweep her away from the current." Water is usually a sign of evil with the Hebrews, as they never were seafaring people. More on that later. When the wise men found the baby Jesus and presented him their gifts, they had a dream about Herod's true intent, so did not return. John continues to write, likewise referring to the Magi, "But the earth helped the woman and opened its mouth and swallowed a flood that the dragon spewed out." The dragon made an effort to seek the woman with child, and likewise, therefore, we have a reflection of Herod and the Magi seeking Mary. The dragon's following actions could shadow Herod's slaughter of the innocents. When he could not find a child, John envisions the dragon became angry with the woman and went off to wage war against her and her offspring. Matthew likewise writes in his Gospel, "When Herod realized he had been deceived by the Magi, he became furious and ordered the massacre of all boys in Jerusalem within the vicinity of 2 years and under." John also writes the parallels of the dragon symbolizing a woman, Mary, escaping the evil clutches. The woman herself fled to the desert, where she had been prepared a place by God. This is probably the Holy Family's flight to Egypt. Upon hearing the Magi that Herod would seek to murder his family, Joseph rose and took the child and his mother by night and departed to Egypt. The dragon was decoded by comparing the 2 biblical books of Revelation and Matthew, and also this part of Matthew could be a reflection of the book of Exodus with the death of the firstborns and the coming out of Egypt. So we have a connection from Revelation to Matthew and even back to Exodus. So we're going to learn some other Roman accounts now, by starting with the beast from the sea. John writes, "I saw a beast come out of the sea with 7 horns. No, my bad. 10 horns and 7 heads. On its horns were 10 diadems, on its heads were a blasphemous name. The beast I saw was like a leopard, but feet like a bear's. Its mouth were like a lion." Most scholars agree this beast is Rome, as it was across the Mediterranean Sea. And later hinted by John, Rome was built on 7 hills and divided into 10 districts first, but later expanded to 14. More on that later. The beast is probably a combination of Emperors Vespasian and his son Titus, who conquered Jerusalem and destroyed the temple. John notices this beast, like all three of them, one of its heads was mortally wounded, but the mortal wound was healed. This mortal wound was the death of Emperor Vespasian and the success of the Hebrew conquest by his son Titus. The conquest of Jerusalem was begun by Vespasian in 70 AD, and his son Titus accompanied him. As the beast of the sea reigned for 42 months, Titus lived to be 42 years old, and reigned just over 2 years when he conquered Jerusalem in 70 AD. Suetonius writes, soon realizing his hope had left behind the complete conquest of Judea, and the final attack of Jerusalem slew 12 of the defenders with many arrows took the city. Concerning the destruction of the temple John writes that he opened its mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blaspheming against his name and the dwelling of those who dwell in heaven. It is also allowed to wage war against, conquer them. It should be noted that now today we might think blasphemy means to speak against God, but no, it means to act against God, like destroying the temple in this case. So the beast of the sea is most likely Emperor Titus or Vespasian, and both were called the conquerors. Another account of the siege of Jerusalem is from Flavius Josephus, who was a Hebrew scribe. It's another story how he came to the Roman side, but anyway. The dwelling mentioned earlier is probably the Temple of Jerusalem, which Josephus vividly describes. I do mean he goes into good detail about it, but we'll just get a little bit of it. Concerning the holy ones conquered, Josephus writes, grief might be better for the destruction of the most wonderful edifice of the temple, ever seen or heard of the glory of its holy places. As if experiencing subjugation, John cries out, who can compare with the beast, or who can fight against it? Likewise, Josephus asks, did they not know that Rome was invincible, and submission to her was an everyday experience? After the temple was desecrated, Josephus notes that all who were caught were put to the sword. John concludes that his description of this beast by stating that anyone destined for captivity goes to captivity. Anyone destined to be slain by the sword shall be slain by the sword. So these two parallels of Revelation and the Jewish wars do point to Titus as being the seven-headed beast. And then we have, I believe, the last one, a lamb come from the earth. John continues to write of the other beast. I saw another beast come from the earth. It had two horns like lambs, but spoke like a dragon. And this lamb is probably Nero, because he was only 17 years old when he became emperor in 54 AD. His mother Agrippina poisoned her husband, Claudius Caesar, so Nero could become emperor. The dragon's voice is most likely Nero's ruthless nature, as his first act as emperor was to poison his stepbrother Britannicus. The common practice once attaining rule was to conquer a nearby province or expand the imperial territory, but Nero did nothing. So far from being attenuated by any wish or hope of increasing power, he even thought of withdrawing from Britain, but changed his mind only because he was ashamed to belittle the glory of his stepfather Claudius, Suetonius, the 12 Caesars. So throughout his reign, Nero didn't really make any attempt to expand the empire. For that matter, he didn't really rule, he reigned in name only. Likewise, John refers to this beast as a performer, not as a ruler. One of the most difficult verses is the mark of the beast. He curses all, the small, the great, the rich and the poor, the free and the slave, to be given marks on the right hand or the forehead, that no one should be able to buy or sell unless he has that mark or the name or the number of the beast. John is probably referring to a coin or a denarii or a sestertii of some sort, because Nero had a special coin minted and only allowed tax to be paid with that coin. It's most noted that he and his mother appeared on the coin. Now, this could be So that's probably where the word forehead, because it's probably referring to his face upon the coin. Or in hand. So on the forehead or on the hand, it probably means the forehead in the hand. So, likewise, Suetonius writes, all classes had to pay income tax, and every tenant of private house or flat was told that he was owed a year's rent to the privy purse. Nero insisted on being paid, but none in the newly minted coin or in silver of high standard. So Revelation and Suetonius both share this notion about only a single currency being accepted. And one of the most poignant points of Revelation, when it says, wisdom is needed here. One who understands can calculate the number of the beast, for it is a number that stands for a person. His number is 666. There have been many attempts to point this to any particular person at that time or this time, but here is the one most scholars agree with. Well, Hebrew and Greek, they don't have numericals like 1, 2, and 3, so each letter A is 1, B is 2, G is 3. That's in their language. So the chart goes like this. We have Caesar Nero's name, and each letter, and its value. It's Kaiser Neron in Greek or Hebrew. So it's K 100, H 5, iota 0, sigma 60, alpha 1, rho 200, nu 50, E epsilon 0, rho 200 again, omega 0, nun 50. And this all adds up to 666. Now that's not the only part that points to Nero. The part that I think is most poignant pointing out to Nero is Revelation 13:13, where it says, the beast performs great signs in making fire come down from the sky and the earth in sight of all the people. This is probably the great fire that burnt down Rome. It started at the Circus Maximus and spread out to the city. Tacitus, in his Annals of Rome, vividly describes, and we're not going to go into every detail, how the fire consumed the city for several days, claiming many places and people. A rumor had gone forth everywhere that at the time of the city was in flames, the emperor appeared upon the private stage and sang the destruction of Troy. Now, performing is most likely an indication of Nero fiddling while Rome burned. Tacitus, likewise, is not really sure that Nero started the fire, but Suetonius says he did. And even in the Middle Ages, Geoffrey Chaucer and Hildegard von Bingen both point out that they both believe that Nero started the fire, and he was likewise the beast of Revelation. So after this burned down, Suetonius describes a good deal of the lavishness of this golden palace, and he says it was overlaid with gold and studded with precious stones. Historians are not sure if this palace even existed, but when Nero moved in, he said, I finally have a house worthy of a human being. Where that is now, where it was anyway, now stands the Colosseum that Vespasian built. That's our first beast. So thus people pointed suspicious to him, and let's see, do I get to it later? Oh, yes. So I'll skip that. And likewise, okay, the Bible doesn't necessarily go in any sort of chronological order because it describes Nero's suicide a little bit earlier. Likewise, symbolized in Revelation. It deceived the inhabitants of the earth with the signs it was allowed to perform within the first beast, telling them to make an image for the beast who had been wounded by the sword and revived. To get rid of this report, Tacitus writes, Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures upon a class for their abominations called the Christians by the populace. Tacitus, Suetonius, they disliked the Christians too, but you see, they just, tolerated them. Nero was one of the first persecutioners, if you will. Tacitus duly notes they were fed to the lions or burned alive to illuminate the streets at night. He would cover them with wax and light them and burn them as candles. Likewise, the fire coming down from the sky. So the image John refers to could also be that Nero had a 120-foot tall statue in the entrance hall, according to Suetonius. And again, the mortal wound is probably Nero's death by his own blade. And since he was the last of the Julio-Claudian family, it was thought that the Roman Empire would end with him. But this beast reviving is probably General Galba coming into office after the mortal wound. Okay. So this mortal wound is probably Nero's own suicide, and Suetonius duly notes that Nero held a blade to his own throat and said, "What an artist dies within me." But he didn't really have the guts to kill himself, so he had his servant do it for him. And just before a cavalry officer entered with a yoke, Nero was to be bound up in a yoke, hung up in a tree, and beaten with metal rods. He couldn't take the punishment he had given to others. He even murdered his own family and a good deal of Rome, and he couldn't handle himself. Unlike the Christian martyrs, who were not afraid to follow in the steps of Peter and Paul. So later on in Revelation, John envisions a Harlot of Babylon who rides a beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. Remember earlier. The angel tells John, "Here is a clue for who has wisdom. The 7 heads represent the 7 hills upon the woman sits. They represent the first 5 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 still lives, and 1 has yet to come, and he will only live for a short while." Babylon is usually referred to means Rome in this case. Here's a possibility for who these 7 kings were. They can give or take a little bit. Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, and Nero. The one still living is probably Vespasian, who conquered Jerusalem, and that would be completed by a son who only reigned for 2 years. But in the year 69, after Nero's death, there were 4 emperors that year. Some of them is only a few months, so it was thought that the empire would end at that time. So Rome would stand a little bit longer, but I'm surprised it did last as long as it did. But when the last emperor finally abdicated, it was the Bishop of Rome, not the emperor. The emperor fled, he ran away when the barbarians were coming. So the Bishop of Rome led the people. So when the emperor abdicated, the Bishop of Rome took his place and became the Pope. Let's see if my Pope's back there. You can barely see it right about here, I think. So this revelation doesn't mean the earth will end. It means the earth will transform. World without end. Sicut erat in principio, nunc et semper, et in saecula saeculorum. Amen.